So as we enter the book of Revelation, John gives us a lot of information that not only places the letter into its context, but he gives us a lot of information that we do well not to lose sight of as we journey on into and through the rest of the book. And we'll see, not just here, but as we go on, that this letter is made up predominantly of three different styles. It's apocalyptic. It is an opening out or a revealing of how things will end. It's prophetic. So it says things that will happen in the future, obviously before the end. But also it's a letter. It's personal. It's written to people John knows, and it's written into a specific situation and context. And the letter starts somewhat abruptly. It's almost like it's just a bit the wrong way around. The greeting is sort of just into the letter, and it starts with this quite abrupt description of this vision that John has had. And he will have had time to reflect upon it, and now he starts to write it down. And he says this is a revelation, the Greek apocalyptic or apocalypse of Jesus Christ from God to reveal, to make known what must take place. And John qualifies its authenticity based upon the fact that the recipients know and so trust him. This is something I have experienced, he says, and I write it for you. And so it becomes taken as authentic by those who receive it. And he says there is blessing in hearing and understanding what is written. For, as we see both in verse 4 and verse 11, the recipients of this revelation are the seven churches. And we'll look at each of those in detail in chapters 2 and 3. And we need to remember these seven churches are facing the crushing persecution of Rome and the temptation to capitulate. From Nero onward, up until Constantine, the Christian church was mercilessly persecuted. Emperor worship was enforced, and the emperor saw themselves as God. And so John says, understand this and be blessed. There is only one God, and he will triumph. Stand firm in your faith. And then as we come to the greeting in verses 4 to 8, we see a mix of what we might term a traditional greeting. He says, grace and peace to you. We see it mixed with poetic encouragement. Verse 7, look, he is coming in the clouds and every eye will see him. We see it mixed with strong encouragement to stand firm, as well as a challenge to Rome. So we start to glimpse, and we'll see more clearly again as we go through, that Revelation is littered with challenges to the political system of the day. That is Rome. John says, I am the Alpha and the Omega, God says. It's only him. And there's this real challenge to how Rome was sort of structured and saw itself in the day. And then in verses 9 through to 20, John then says where he is and what he saw. Now, remember, John has had this vision or series of visions, and then he's had to try and think about them, process them, order them, and write them down. And John tells us that he is on Patmos and he's suffering for his faith. And we saw in the introduction with the little map, we see where Patmos is, this tiny little island. He's been exiled by Rome for being a troubler of the empire. And yet we sense that he's not lost anything of his love for God. I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day. And nor has he lost anything of his love for these God's people who he knows and now writes to them. And then he recounts this vision that he's had. We might almost describe it as an out-of-body experience or close to that. And we'll see this is not uncommon. Moses and the burning bush, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, Paul, littered through both the Old and the New Testament. We have records of experiences not dissimilar to this. And John has this vision of Messiah, the Christ. And as the description tumbles out, John is overwhelmed. And we see that in verse 17. When I saw him, I fell at his feet as though dead. And we see how the description talks also of character and nature. And so the robe and the sash is a reference to the Old Testament priesthood of Aaron when it was established, this sort of presence of God in the midst of his people. The white hair, old age, wisdom, eyes like fire symbolizes divine power, feet of bronze, something of being strong and permanent, voice like rushing waters, echoes of Ezekiel, the voice of God, face like that of the Son, echoes of Moses on Sinai, where Moses stands before God, and when Moses comes into the people, his face shone and he covers it with a veil. And so here, this person in the vision is someone who is God, has been in God's presence. Double-edged sword, echoes of Isaiah and Hebrews, the word of God. No wonder John is overwhelmed. He is in the very presence of God. And then he tells John, this vision, this figure, tells John what the 7 stars and the 7 lampstands represent, which is good, because then we don't have to worry about trying to think about what it represents. We don't have to guess. We see that the angels of the churches, the stars or the angels of the churches, these are most likely, in the context of the book, that representation of the earthly reality in the heavenly realm. And so Jesus holding the stars, these angels, which are the churches, holding the stars, which are the churches, and holding the angels, reminds John and encourages the readers that Christ and not Rome holds the church community. And their fate is not at the hands of Rome, but actually, and we'll see, and some of these churches that we read about are no longer there, but we'll see from the letters to the churches, the fate of the church is in the hands of God, but is actioned, if that makes sense, by the response of the people. And so I'll stop there and